Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our second Broadband Middle Mile Initiative Advisory Committee meeting. It's a great pleasure to have our full committee here. Before we start, let's go ahead and turn it over to Jules to have a roll call.
Good morning, Ms. Tong.
Here.
Designee for Ms. Badger, Ms. Guzman Aceves.
Here.
Ms. Miller. Gail, I think we saw you. Oh, you're muted.
Here, sorry.
Mr. Omishakin.
Present. Good afternoon, everybody.
Hello. Senator Gonzalez. I think I saw you. I accidentally stepped over Secretary Richardson.
Here.
Senator Gonzalez. Senator McGuire.
Good afternoon. Here.
Assemblymember Quirk Silva.
Here.
Assemblymember Wood.
Here.
We do have a quorum.
Thank you. All right, and welcome all of our members of the public who are joining. And we are looking at, oh my goodness, probably over, that's right, over 120 people now. So thank you for taking great interest in this committee update. And a little bit of a housekeeping that I want to call it out to let folks know. With this many people attending a virtual meeting, it's very hard to keep both having a concentrated dialogue focusing on the presenter as well as monitoring the chat. So for today's meeting, and probably something that we're gonna keep applying if this works out well, is to have a disabled chat feature until the public comment period, which is towards the end of the meeting, so that we would allow our committee members as well as the presenter to have a concentrated attention to each other. But as questions are coming up or as you are queuing up to speak, our staff on this call will be able to support you and put you in the queue for public comment period. And Jules, if you could provide that instruction briefly so that we can get going.
Certainly, when we get to the public comment period, if those on Zoom could raise their hands, that would be helpful. And we'll ask the people who are on the phone first. And just a high-level overview. Just as a reminder, the public comments limited to 2 minutes per commenter, 1 commenter per entity, and it should be addressed the work during the meeting. And the time set aside for public comment is for public comment. If people have questions, it would be helpful if they can send them into the to the committee email. That would allow us to start developing a Q&A document so everybody can see the questions and answers. And toward the end of the meeting, we'll put all those links in the chat for everyone to see.
Thank you, Jules, for that. And with that, I wanted to briefly go through the agenda for today, and I want to also open it up to committee member if there are any additional items that you'd like to add or revise. So if we can go ahead and present the agenda. Thank you. Next page, please. Or there you go. So after the opening, we'll go ahead and I would ask if any of the committee member wants to make any opening comments. And then we're going to go right into the third-party administrator self-introduction, followed by an update from the Deputy Director of Broadband and Digital Literacy, Scott Adams, to give the committee an update of what the progress has been made in the past 30 days. And then there will be a 30 minutes information sharing session from each of the business entities in the state that have been working on this. As a previous meeting, after each sections of the agenda, there will be opportunity for committee members to also provide input or ask questions. We will go through that step before we open up to the public, which have a dedicated commenting period towards the end of this meeting. So with that agenda, are there any comments or questions or input from the committee members to begin with? All right, hearing none. Let's go ahead and move to the next agenda item, Scenic, or I should say our third-party administrator. Oh, we have trouble unmuting? There you go.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Louis Fox. I'm the president and CEO of Cpuc. If you could go to the next slide, please. TPA always sounds like a paper product of some sort. So I was asked to talk a little bit about what Cpuc is, and then a little bit about what we've been doing. Now, we have been the third-party administrator for 2 weeks, so that'll be a rather short segment. Cpuc is a not-for-profit organization that was chartered 25 years ago by the University of California, Cal State, Stanford, Caltech, and USC. And over time now has grown to include all the other educational segments, libraries, university healthcare institutions, as well as other healthcare institutions. And you can see we have a number of research institutions that are outside the universities. We are now up to about 25 tribal nations that are on the network. Next slide, please. This is a picture of the backbone network, which is a multi-layered network. We have members in every county in California. We operate a number of networks, and I'm going to talk a little bit about some of them. And as I noted, this is our 25th year in existence, and sort of a milestone for us. Next slide, please. This is again, a picture of the backbone network. And the way this works is that what you're seeing there are major nodes on the network. And in a way, those nodes are each, if you'll think of them as data centers, where we do peering and exchange, we cache various kinds of content, and try and move the data as close to the users as we possibly can. We direct connect with dark fiber to all the research universities and some of the larger institutions, the Los Angeles Unified School District, the Los Angeles Public Library, some of the larger community college districts, and so on. Next slide, please. I wanted to use this slide to sort of as an example of how we connect to a segment, but it's also an example of a middle mile network. And what you see there, and it's a complicated one to look at, and I apologize. You almost have to look at it on a wall in a 12-foot by 5-foot kind of to make sense of it. But each of those lines are connections to aggregator sites. And in this case, the aggregators are K-12 county offices of education. And so behind each of those county offices of education, they connect the districts and the schools. And those are all the dots, all the small dots that you see on there are individual schools. So this is the school would connect through the district to the aggregator site, and from the aggregator site to a node on our backbone, and from our backbone then to the global internet. And we handle the traffic for these sites, and we do some interesting things with it. Because of the size of the network, we moved probably upwards of an exabyte of data when we measured it a couple of years ago. It's probably 2 now. That would be 2 billion gigabytes. It's an awful lot of data. And so it's advantageous for other networks and cloud providers and content providers to exchange traffic with us without it having to go over the commercial internet. And then we buy a certain amount of commodity internet for those routes that aren't covered by the peering. But it's a really effective way for us to serve our members in ways that advantage them in terms of the quality of the connection, but also the cost. Next slide, please. These are what we sort of typically call network baby pictures. This is another network that we run on behalf of research in Western states. And at each of those nodes, they connect to multiple research universities. This one is particularly important. Next slide, please, because it forms some of the backbone of a national international peering exchange we run. So we do this with some funding from the National Science Foundation, but we do it on behalf of the entire United States research community. And this enables those researchers to access data specialized in global instruments, research partnerships in the Asia Pacific region. And then as you see in Chicago and New York and DC with partners, they can get to colleagues and data and instruments like, for instance, the Large Hadron Collider at CERN via those network nodes. And we have an express lane across the country. We're in the process of extending that to Miami, where Florida International University has a node that connects to the Caribbean, Central South America, and then from South America, from Fortaleza in Brazil, across to Africa in order to connect to African institutions. Those connections exist now, we just don't have the express route, as you will. This was an absolutely critical infrastructure and remains one for global COVID research and for the massive amounts of data that researchers were sharing across the globe. Next slide, please. I won't go into the benefits at length, but there are many benefits to the 12,000 member institutions that we have being on our network, and not the least of which is being part of a multi-segment community. And our focus has historically been in two areas: being on the leading edge of networking so that we can support what is arguably one of the most amazing research communities on the planet here in California, but also focusing on access and equity for all the community anchor institutions that we serve in California. And very often those missions intersect, and there are new capacities and new opportunities from the research community that redound to the benefit of a school, a library, a community college. Next slide, please. So we signed our contract that I'm sure Amy or Scott will talk about at the end of August, and ginned up the organization. And as you'll see, we even have a website probably tomorrow, not with a whole lot on it, but at least to start. We're spending a lot of time understanding the workflows of the existing partners in the state and how we fit into that, and sharing documents and talking about how we're going to be able to share information so that we can move this project along with alacrity. That's important to all of us to get this connectivity out to those communities, particularly those communities that are un or underserved. Next slide, please. We did set up a limited liability corporation with for business and limited liability reasons that will be working with the core scenic organization. We have taken as the guiding principles those that you adopted at your last meeting, and that is shaping all of our work and work processes. Next slide, please. These are some of these folks probably are on the call. These are this project, for those of us who have worked on digital equity issues, and I've been working on these issues since there was a public internet, is the most ambitious and potentially the most impactful project that any state has ever taken on in the history of the public internet. And for me, it's meant that I am able to attract some folks who are known globally and are talented, who have been working on these issues as long as I have, to work on them with me. And you see some of them there. There will be others coming on, and you see the kinds of disciplines that we will be drawing on also from the scenic community. Next slide, please. Similarly, we have been able to reach out to a number of great leaders in the digital equity front. Missing from the slide is a fellow named Danny Allen, who recently retired from SAP Labs, who is both an engineer's engineer and led SAP's global efforts around equity. So it's shaping up to be a phenomenal set of advisors who have very deep expertise, and particularly for the most part have deep reaches into communities, both urban, rural, and tribal in California. Next slide, please. And it's to you now, Scott.
All right, before we go to Scott, I just wanted to make sure, thank you, Louis, for the self-introduction here. I wanted to give an opportunity to the advisory committee members to, if they have any questions or comment for you. Oh, yes, Gail?
Thank you. I think Louis probably needed no introduction, because when we were going through the process of SB 156, there were lots and lots of folks who really believed in what Cpuc had done and how they had begun to change the landscape. So we're really grateful for the partnership and the contract we've signed. I've been involved in a lot of different contracts, and I have to say that Louis and his team's willingness to work even before a contract was signed to sort of understand the questions to ask, where and how we were putting this together, Kim's willingness to understand the legislation, it's all been phenomenal and incredibly reasonable. And there is really a shared commitment to making this work and making it work well and being reasonable. And I hope that with the help of this team of folks that we can all approach this together. I think, Louis is steeped in the history of the classics and kind of calls on a lot of wisdom from many of those of us that came before us that are much wiser, and approaches this whole project with that perspective like so many of us do. So I just want to make sure that folks really understand kind of the way this partnership is working, the way we're working together, and how important it is to each of us to really see this work as best it can. And obviously, if there's any specific questions of any of the details, we're always willing to share that. And I just thought it was helpful to provide that context for the way in which we all hope to work together. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Miller. And Assembly Member Quicksilver.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. And I want to thank Cpuc for their presentation. Just a little context, I'm a classroom teacher, even though a legislator for 30 years, and we always had to not only put together our short-term, daily, weekly, monthly, and year plan. As you know, a lot of planning goes into this. And so I appreciate already the background you have with, I thought you said 25 years of experience. That goes a long way. But what I'm wondering is, will you be building in a plan to evaluate for various not only goals that you have, but timelines? And I'll be a broken record, as you will find in this committee, because I really, my ultimate big goal is that we get this connection in underserved areas. So will there be an evaluation put forward and some accountability matrix? Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. There'll be a plan. There'll be, as you call it, an accountability matrix. And we're also evaluating the operating expenses ongoing and trying to get our arms around what that will be for 30 years.
All right, thank you for that. Any other comments or questions from us, the committee? All right, seeing none, thank you, Louis, for the presentation. Please stay on as there might be a question coming up later. And for now, I'll go ahead and hand it over to Scott Adams for your update.
Thank you, Director Tong. Hello, committee members and members of the public. It's my pleasure to be here and provide a program update on the work that's been done thus far. I think you've heard people talk about the short time frame we have been in this for 60 days, but given the statutory and federal funding timelines, we've been moving quickly. So just going to shape the update today basically into 3 categories, and that's to recap the work that was done in the initial 30 days, provide an update on the work that's been done in the last 30 days, and then provide a look ahead on the work we're going to be focusing on in the next 30 days. Next slide, please. So just want to recap, this is information we reported out at the last committee meeting, but in the initial 30 days, we really strove to set out and establish the leadership structure and governance. So included in that was establishing the Middle Mile Advisory Committee and holding the first meeting on August 18th. The next piece was establishing the working group, and which consists of the Department of Transportation, the Public Utilities Commission, the Department of Technology, and the Department of Finance. And then establishing some program oversight and state and local fiscal fund recovery reporting, which was the Department of Technology working with the Department of Finance. We also moved fairly quickly on agreements and contracts. So knowing how important the collaboration and roles and responsibilities were, initiated interagency discussions with Caltrans and the Public Utilities Commission, and initiated the process to retain the third-party administrator per the guidance provided in statute. In terms of the working group, the initial 30 days was really identifying key staff, getting them in place and getting them accustomed to working together in the various entities, and establishing weekly working sessions. And then I think lastly and most importantly was establishing and getting to work on the work streams that were established for the project. Next slide, please. So, some high-level updates of what we've done in the last 30 days on our agreements and roles and responsibilities. We have completed the interagency agreement with Caltrans and outlined roles and responsibilities. We are putting the final touches on our CPUC interagency agreement. And as Director Tong had mentioned, and you had heard from our third-party administrator, we had retained the third-party administrator and entered into an agreement with them. As Mr. Fox had mentioned, he's only been on 2 weeks, but we have fast followed once the agreement was settled to begin the onboarding process with the third-party administrator, which is began with some significant information exchange between the Department of Technology and CNIC, integrating the third-party administrator with the business partner working group and on some of the work stream sessions. And then most importantly is establishing a culture building process. If you have heard folks mention, this is both an ambitious project, but it's going to require partnership amongst the 4 agencies that we mentioned before, but the third-party administrator and a number of other internal and external stakeholders. And so that's something that's critical and important for the success of this project, and something we're really diving into. The next piece was establishing a GIS data lake. Data and mapping is obviously going to be so critical to laying the foundation for the project. So wanted to create a shared space in the interim for some of the state agencies to share and harmonize information and prepare that ahead for when we get more layers of critical information through the public comment process, et cetera. And then lastly, it's really been taking the work streams that we had developed and the work that had begun and building out our work plan. Next slide, please. So we've mentioned the work streams that we reported out in the last meeting. There are 8 of them right now, which are program management and oversight, advisory committee support, communications, external affairs, agreements and contracts, data and mapping, planning, design and engineering, and build and expand middle mile. So what the Department of Technology and our oversight role in working with the partners is really putting some meat on the bones, if you will, of the work streams and putting them into a project management framework and putting together the tasks and deliverables and owners and timelines to keep this project moving along. So really just want to touch on the next 30 days of look ahead. Obviously, just given the timeline, it's going to continue to execute the work plan, focus on our 30-day goals. The PUC, who you'll hear from later, they're doing their public comment, which I believe closes on the 15th of October. And then the next 30 days, while work will be done in each of the 8 work streams, there's going to be a big emphasis on the data and mapping and planning over the next 30 days. And that's now that we have the third-party administrator on board, establishing information and data sharing framework, particularly criteria around the information that we all have and what can be shared, how it can be shared, harmonizing state data mapping efforts, which is the GIS coordination and the data lake, harmonizing ISP middle mile data, and then establishing some no regret project tasks for the Department of Transportation. Their role is obviously critical, and they've got a process they've got to follow on pre-work on constructed segments. So we want to make sure that they have enough lead time on that. And then the other area of emphasis is going to be on design and engineering. That's going to be the next 30 days and beyond. But I believe, as Mr. Fox had noted, that this is there's a tight time frame and there's a need for planning, and each of these phases of the project are not necessarily linear and that they're going to happen concurrently. So that's going to be a major focus. And so that concludes my update, and Director Tom, I can kick it back to you.
All right, thank you for that, Scott, and open it up to the advisory committee for comments and questions. Yes, Secretary Richardson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate that. Appreciate the presentation from Scott and from Mr. Fox. Just wondering, how will the working groups coordinate or have a cohesive approach to equity? Real interested in how that's going to all work out.
Well, I would say that that's obviously critically important, Secretary Richardson, and thank you for the request. I think the focus on equity is embedded in the statute. It's also embedded in some of the foundational documents that came prior in the executive order and the broadband action plan, where there are related efforts. And I know that each of the partners in the working group are critically aware of the importance of equity, including now with the inclusion of the third-party administrator. I think Mr. Fox had shown just the composition of his board and the diversity that it reflects, and the focus on that.
Mr. Fox, do you want to address that or any additional response?
Just to say that, I mean, I think it's one of the fundamental principles that this board came up with in their last meeting was the prioritizing of equity issues. So I think it's endemic in the project and in the organizations.
Sounds like Assembly Member Corsola wants to champion on that.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm trying to multitask and eat lunch
No
real
problem.
fast too, but I just want to make clear on, I think most of us understand the difference between equity and equality, but it can get very confusing to the public. And many times there can be some very contentious arguments about that, meaning that if we really follow the idea that we're going to invest these taxpayer dollars in sometimes a fashion using the equity philosophy, then we may be putting more of those dollars into, say, Central Valley, because that is where there's more emphasis needed. And then the remainder may then be, I'm assumed, allocated to other areas. But if we do it by equality, it would be equally divided across the state. And we have to be very clear about that early on, because otherwise, whether it's my colleagues in the legislature, whether it's local elected officials, college campuses, they might say we're not getting our fair share because we're not equally dividing it, because we're following the equity focus, which is sometimes there's going to be much more of an investment in one area to get that up to par as other areas. So I'm just trying to make that as clear as I can as far as what my focus is and that difference between equity and equality, because a lot of people get really angry about it really quickly.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
All right. Thank you for that question and further direction from the two committee member. Are there any other questions for other committee member or Scott or Mr. Fox have any additional response you'd like to add to that? Okay. All right. Seeing none, thank you so much. And let's go ahead and move to the next portion of the agenda. We'll be hearing from each of the business entity partners to provide an update on their respective initiatives. So let's begin with CPUC on the middle mile public comment process.
Thank you, Chair Tong. And if we could go to the next slide, please. So I'm Robert Osborne, Director of the Communications Division at the CPUC, and I'll briefly cover some of the public comments on the preliminary middle mile network locations in the broadband trailer bill. So just to recap, the trailer bill specifies that the Commission solicit and receive public comment within 90 days of the effective date of the legislation, which was July 20th. The Commission requested comment in ruling 1, which you'll see here highlighted in blue, focused on current network infrastructure at the beginning of August. And we have links down below to that, rule or that proceeding. In response, the Commission received formal party comments from 46 parties and informal comments from 31. A broad range of entities filed comments. The filings are publicly available on the PUC docket, which is also linked at the bottom of this slide. And just to provide a snapshot, so from providers, we had a diverse group of providers comment on the availability of the infrastructure and where and how a statewide open access middle mile network could be useful. From public entities such as counties and local governments, we received comment on how the middle mile network locations could better address the areas of greatest need in their jurisdictions. And this kind of ties back to the question about equity with regard to prioritizing areas that are most in need. Next, we had nonprofits and community-based organizations addressing the issue of the communities that they serve. And then from tribes, we had the Yurok tribe comment on how the proposed locations would enable the last mile connections on the tribe's ancestral lands. Reply comments for this ruling are to be filed by September 21st. And as Scott said, there is a second ruling I'll go into in a second. There's no deadline though for general informal public comments, so you don't have to be a party to comment informally. And we can provide a link for more information on how to do that. So as I said earlier, the second ruling, which is the second thing highlighted in blue, we issued a second ruling on planned infrastructure last Thursday. And the schedule for opening comment on this ruling is for October 1st for the first set, and then reply comments on or before October 15th. Additionally, we will be issuing a data request to providers, and we might have additional requests for input on topics that would be beneficial. And I believe we're trying to get that data request out today. So that would be for existing middle mile network infrastructure. So that's all I have to say on this slide. I'll hand it back to you, Chair Tong.
All right, thank you. I wonder if there's maybe the material next should be presented first before we come back to the advisory committee. Why don't we do that? Yeah, there you go, because I think those are all hand in hand. So let's keep going. Would this be Caltrans coming up, or is it CPUC continuing on, or both?
Caltrans is Elizabeth Dewar is gonna start out on this slide.
Got it.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Director Tong and the committee members. Appreciate the opportunity to be here to share on behalf of Caltrans our efforts since the last meeting. Caltrans is continuing to coordinate with CDT, PUC, and our newest partner, CNIC, on the location and priorities of the middle mile network. At the same time, Caltrans is moving forward on meeting with each of our 12 districts to discuss and plan the delivery of the broadband projects, looking at leveraging our transportation projects that overlap the middle mile network, as well as planning new standalone broadband projects. As of this week, we'll have met with half of our districts, and we are meeting with the remaining half of the districts over the next 2 weeks, with the last meeting scheduled for October 1st. As part of these meetings and in our discussions, we're currently working to identify and start planning the projects, not only using our design bid build delivery method, but we'll also be taking advantage of alternative delivery methods, including CMGC, design build, and job order contracting, providing us with some flexibility to streamline the delivery of these projects. And those are our current efforts since the last meeting. Thank you, and I'll turn it back over to Mr. Osborne for the remainder of the presentation.
Thank you, Elizabeth. So just one more point on this map. So as a practical next step, we'll be looking at where the preliminary locations in the proposed middle mile routes align with the existing plans. I think actually Elizabeth already touched upon that. So we could go to the next slide. So location prioritization and enabling last mile connections. This is a topic of discussion in the last advisory committee. The broadband trailer bill specifies prioritization for the statewide open access middle mile broadband network. And there's a number of priorities listed in the statute. One of the prioritizations that came up in the last advisory meeting related to the 25.3 threshold. So it says that locations that enable last mile connections to residences unserved by 25 megabits per second down and 3 megabits per second out. So I'm going to talk a bit about more of that in detail. So in addition to the broadband trailer bill, which has the 25.3 written in it, the federal funding from the American Rescue Plan Act rule specifies that funds be used to serve unserved or underserved households and businesses. And then it states that unserved and underserved households or businesses means one or more households or businesses that are not currently served by a wireline connection that reliably delivers at least 25 megabits per second download and 3 megabits per second upload. And I'm sorry, this is rather dry, but the whole point is that the unserved status of 25.3 is a central part of the middle mile locations funding and analysis. The slide here is just a graphic to show, basically to visualize the last mile connection and the prioritization that we're talking about. Those connections, though, relate to the rest of the network. So to support the public engagement and understanding of 25.3, we will be making available simple use versions of the statewide broadband data, specifically though on the 25.3 end user connections. We plan to provide a shapefile and also a KMZ, which is what can be used in Google Earth of those locations. We'll also guide those who are interested in deployment in communities, namely census designated places, municipalities and counties on how to use that data. The 25.3 threshold has been in place for quite a while at the federal level, and we have data showing unserved households using that threshold. But the guidance from Treasury includes additional criteria, that is namely reliable 25.3, and that expands the unserved household count beyond not just the 25.3 that we talked about earlier, but also beyond the 100 down threshold that we used for the initial proposed middle mile locations. We're currently doing the geoprocessing to display those census designated places in the same middle mile format that we did for the 100 down. But just as a preview, we have a Tableau dashboard available that I can put the link in later in the chat so people can see at the county level what the difference is for 25.3 reliable compared to 100 down. And you'll find that actually the number of households that are unserved at 25.3 reliable is actually more than the 100 down. So that's a key point. And I can get into more about what reliable means, but the guidance from Treasury means they suggest excluding DOCSIS 2, which is an obsolete technology or soon to be obsolete, as well as DSL, which is a technology that's on its way out. So beyond the preliminary analysis, though, with regard to the middle mile map and how that would change using the 25.3 reliable, basically those yellow circles that we saw last time on the middle mile map would get larger just because there's more unserved households at 25.3 reliable. That said, the routes in the middle mile map are proposed, and we have been receiving comments from parties with specific suggestions on routes that they believe need to be modified. So this has been really helpful to get public comment. Staff are in the process of logging those suggestions, and we'll be taking those into account in addition to other requirements in statute for analysis in coordination with the third-party administrator and with CDT. So I'm sorry that was a rather long address of the 25.3 issue, but I wanted to talk about that since that came up last time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Osborne. That was actually quite interesting to me, but then again, you're speaking to a tech geek here. So, so with that, are there any additional item that you all need to cover in this section before we open it up to the committee members? No, seeing none. Okay, let's go ahead and open it up to the committee members. Question, comments? I thought that was fascinating. No question, comment. So I'll jump in first because I do have a question for Caltrans specifically, Ms. Dorr. Thank you for sharing the effort that you're doing with the GIS effort, as well as talking to the different district. Could you elaborate a little bit more on, in your coordination with CPUC, specifically on, how to look at the opportunity from the current construction work that you have and comparing to the desire, I'll use the word desire because it's all pending, public comment and TPA suggestion on where services need to be provided from an unserved and then underserved perspective. If you can talk about, some of the rationale that perhaps you all are looking at and how to leverage the opportunity that presents itself from all of the construction that's going on into that prioritization criteria.
Of course. Thank you, Director Tong. Caltrans is working closely both with your department, CDT, as well as PUC. And from Caltrans's perspective right now, we're looking at the entire proposed 8,000 plus miles of the middle mile network location. What Caltrans has done is has looked at all of our projects that overlap those middle mile network locations. And then our districts have done an initial assessment to identify which of those projects may be viable for adding this broadband scope to that work. So as we're delivering our transportation projects, they'll be in different phases of design and construction. And some of the criteria that we're looking at will be based on the environmental analysis that was performed on our transportation project, looking at the project limits, the start and end of the project limits to see where that overlap lies and if we've done the appropriate environmental analysis that fits for our transportation project, but that will also meet the needs of adding this broadband scope. So we're looking at a few things in terms of categories of projects. And as you mentioned, trying to leverage our projects that are currently in construction. Some of the ideas that we're looking at comes down to determining the needs of these communities, especially the ones that have no service and very slow service, and identifying what that design might look like. With the information of the design, that will give Caltrans the opportunity to work with our contractors to determine which projects will best meet adding the scope of work to those contracts. So over the next few weeks, as we continue to assess the middle mile locations in terms of the public comment that was provided to PUC, Caltrans will also be doing additional assessment of our transportation projects, looking for more opportunity to add that work to our projects. We're also, though, looking at the design phase for projects that are currently designed to take opportunity there to add the scope of work. But then lastly, we need to do this effort all at once. So while we are leveraging our transportation projects where possible and performing that analysis, we're looking at locations where the transportation projects don't overlap the middle mile, or what we've initially assessed as non-viable projects for adding the scope to, so that we can start planning that work, especially in those areas of need.
Great, thank you for that. I understand that the getting the construction, if indeed requires the build and all that, then there's a long leeway in with all of the prep work that needed to be done in advance. So the sooner those can get started, and perhaps that was what the category of no regret items that you can start it to save some time, the better it will be. So I'm glad to hear that's progressing.
Great, thank you, Director Tong.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? My goodness, I probably need to think about if we want to move this meeting right before lunch, because I think this is a sleepy time right after lunch. All right. If there are no further questions or comments, last chance before the committee, we are going to open up. Let me make sure that this is everything covered on the agenda. We can go ahead and open up for public comment. I'm giving you a couple more seconds to change your mind. Oh, there is Ms. Miller. And then in the meantime, let me queue up our staff to let us know whether there are people waiting to be for the public comment. But Ms. Miller, go ahead.
Well, I don't know. Just generally, I think also the piece that we're not discussing here today, but is that as we know at the PUC, and I don't know if the commissioner or Mr. Osborne want to comment on this, but obviously all of this middle mile is all about our bridge to last mile. I know Mr. Osborne started on that, but that is a really important piece. I know a lot of folks are interested in that, and we're very aware of that. So I don't know, Mr. Osborne, or if the commissioner just want to just comment on that a little bit. I know you're just starting that process as well. So I don't know if folks are interested in that. It could certainly be something we discuss later. I know we're focused on the middle mile here, but that bridge is also really important to us. So just letting folks know that we're doing a lot of work on those issues as well.
Defer to the commissioner first.
Thank you, Director Osborne. Well, we're so fortunate and very grateful for the legislative leadership on not only the component of last mile that was included in the $6 billion package, but in the extension of the California Advanced Service Fund, which will provide us for even further project development in the last mile. So we are in a very exciting place. I think that, yes, the other fortunate thing is that we have these active venues for the discussion, and one of them is the middle mile. The broadband deployment proceeding, where the middle mile is being examined, will also be the same venue for the last mile funding from the federal side. We have the existing rulemaking on the California Advanced Service Fund. And so we are hopefully soon, upon signature by the governor, get started on working on those pieces. I guess I would say that we are going to be very open and taking comments and creative thinking about how to bridge these projects. As we know, some of the last mile projects have the ability to access middle mile today. And so we want to move on those as quickly as possible. And really, there will hopefully come an opportunity where we will be able to take a more proactive role, maybe to Secretary Richardson's earlier point. The opportunity that we have, particularly with the federal funding, is that we will be able to really deal with some of those communities that have been chronically underserved and actually build the bridge together. And that's really the most exciting part about this opportunity. And so there are many thoughts about how to do that. And I certainly today don't have all the solutions, and they will be varied. But very excited about the partnerships. And we have shortly, we will be coming out with the staff proposal on that last mile funding after we do some more coordination internally with our sister agencies. But Director Osborne, did you want to say anything further on that?
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. Just to reiterate, the public, through the public process, we've received a lot of valuable input from the parties. Just as an example, the North Bay North Coast Regional Consortium provided some very specific input on the highways in that area with regard to the routes that were in the proposal and what they suggest needs to be changed. And then secondly, through just daily and weekly meetings and coordination with Department of Technology and the third-party administrator that are already underway. I think that's how we prioritize and make sure that the middle mile and last mile are working together.
Very good. Thank you for that update. And as Ms. Miller mentioned, that even though it's not on the agenda today, but they do go hand in hand. So perhaps in future meeting agenda, and this is also a plug for agenda item input from the committee members. If you have anything you'd like to hear, they don't necessarily have to be scheduled for the immediate following month, but we can lay that out in a 3 to 4 month type of a deal, so that they can be you all can receive in a briefing. Assembly member.
Yeah, for a future agenda item, just before we go to public comments. And again, I may not have the acronym right, but the CASF funding, as we know that I see Senator Lena Gonzalez had a excellent response with her legislation, and Assemblymember Cecilia Aguiar Curry. We don't know that that's going to be signed, but by the next meeting we will. So kind of a focus on how are these funds going to be allocated? What about the current applications and so forth? But just on that. And did I say it right? Is it CASF? Okay. I'm starting to learn my acronyms here. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, let's take note of that. And are there any other comments or feedback from the committee member before we open up to public comment? Okay, seeing none, we're 5 minutes ahead of schedule. Woohoo! Let's go ahead and hand it off to our staff. Let's go ahead and open up. Do we have anybody sign up for public comment?
So if members who are on Zoom, if they could raise their hand, and if there's anybody on the phone who would like to provide public comment, why don't you acknowledge that, and we can go ahead and start with those people.
All right. I'm gonna
Anybody on the
give you a
phone?
minute. Give you a minute to go ahead and get organized here. We do have over 160 people who are listening and are participating, so we'll see. Looks like they're, go ahead and Jill, go ahead and call.
I just wanted to do one last call for the phone. We can come back to phone participants at the end. So we'll go ahead and start with Mr. Davis.
Thank you, committee. I wanted to say an extra special thank you to Assemblywoman Silva and Secretary Richardson. I represent Kern County Superintendent of Schools, or the county office in Kern County. And we're the third largest county by square miles, but have a rather large socioeconomic disadvantaged student base. And I really appreciate your focus on equity. I think that we've done some great things with BIG and Scenic in the past, bridging some of those gaps, but there's still a large part of our county that is missing that middle mile. And so I'm really excited to see how that equity can be applied to this project.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. Joe, next.
Mr. Santos.
Yes, a couple of comments. The equity versus equality really strikes home when you're talking about the west side of Fresno County and all these valley communities. And I would stand strongly by the principle of equity for those communities. They've been left off the map and they're still getting 10 Mbps services in brand new subdivisions. So I can understand there's going to be a lot of debate about that. The other one is that the broadband map, which is going to be used, there's still, the debate is not settled over proprietary information. And I think we're letting a lot of those major service providers, the existing service providers, off the hook if we delve into the map and we just go with the information that's there, which is both the FCC and the PUC maps that are very inadequate. Lastly, I always have a little issue with the technology neutral debate. If we allow, and I see from your drawing of the satellite and underground cabling and one of the schematics that was shown, it's very good, but I don't see a hierarchy. I just see that it's all there, but I don't see a matter of hierarchy, which to me should be number one, fiber, and everything else after that. But on the other hand, there's a question about 5G. Are we going to allow certain telcos to utilize public funds to subsidize 5G? We just saw the small cell bill running through Congress, the two small cell bills, 556 and 537. And those are really to the detriment of a lot of small communities, a lot of communities up and down the state. 5G would benefit the ag dominated economy in a lot of these areas, but it would divert valuable resources during a time when there's a global, shortage and supply issue, and not many farm workers have 5G phones or self-piloting cars. So I'd like to know how that's going to be addressed. Lastly, if Scenic is the independent LLC that's overseeing and implementing the RFPs and the whole process, I assume that we'll cut contractual ties with applicants so as to avoid the appearance of self-dealing. Those are my impressions, and I thank you. I hope I don't, I hope I'm very clear. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Santos, for those comments. Go ahead, Joe.
I didn't know, did Rob or somebody want to answer those questions, or are we taking them as comments?
We're just gonna go ahead and take it in comments and then,
Okay.
yeah.
Cole?
Good afternoon, then. I will frame my comments less as a question as more of a comment to help kind of guide our local level and consortium level input. Now that we're starting to add more departments and agencies on the state level for Caltrans, Scenic, I think it would be very helpful to make sure it is obvious who our point of contact is to assist on middle mile infrastructure projects coming into our county or our consortium regions. I think that would be one thing that I would like to have real strong clarity on. So appreciate it. Thank you. I look forward to helping.
Thank you. I should also remind that I think we can tell some from the label who you represent, but if you could also announce who you represent and you are, that way it's easier for staff to track and follow up with necessary steps.
Katie, I don't know if it's pronounced Hydorn.
Hi, yeah, you absolutely got it right. Most people don't, so thanks. It's great to see several of you on the call. My name's Katie Hydorn. I'm the Executive Director of Insure the Uninsured Project. We're a health policy nonprofit that's been around for 25 years, mostly focused on coverage. But post the Affordable Care Act and during COVID, we've been starting to shift our direction to also looking at social determinants of health and all of the other pieces in the health system that impact coverage. And so that's really why I'm here today. You're probably wondering why someone in the health world is listening to this conversation. I see several of you who know me laughing. So I love to connect people, and a lot of what ITEP does is convene people around healthcare. We convene people at the state level, and we convene local healthcare delivery systems as well. And we do this every year through a nearly 800-person health policy conference that we did virtually last year and doing virtually again this year to be safe. But we also run 10 local regional working groups that bring the healthcare delivery system together to discuss issues. And interestingly enough, in our conversations about coverage and how COVID-19 impacted people at the local delivery system, broadband came up universally. And so those of us who are health policy experts, we went, wow, broadband. We don't know anything about that. So we spent the last year, my staff and I at this organization, and with the help of several stakeholders I see on this call, learning about broadband. And I just wanted to let you know that the health system and we sort of stand ready as an organization to help bridge that. We've made this conversation part of our conference, as part of our telehealth panels. We've made it part of our online policy forums this last year. We're working with the Department of Healthcare Services on the telehealth advisory work group. So we're very engaged in this work. We also developed a broadband for health basics fact sheet to try and just provide some of these definitions for people who are not as familiar with broadband like we were, some very specific definitions to make this more accessible for them. So this came up in our communities. We look at it from both a healthcare access perspective as well as a health equity perspective. Thank you, Secretary Richardson. And this is not going away in our community. So we'll be reaching out to you offline, but really appreciate the work that you're doing here today. Thanks for the opportunity.
I don't see any more hands. What I'm going to do in the meantime is I just put the links in the chat for everyone to see. For those of you who don't have them.
All right. Thank you, Joe. It looks like there are 2 more hand raised. We can call upon them.
Mr. Pacheco.
Hi, everybody. Again, nice to see you all, and thank you so much for your service to our state. I just want to say something really quickly. I'm here trying to advocate for Santa Clara County, and which is at the heart of the Silicon Valley. Oftentimes people believe that because we're in the Silicon Valley, there should be no digital divide, or that everybody has access to broadband. But that's certainly not the case. And I really want to make sure that those types of thoughts are dispelled. In Santa Clara County, it's known that our south part of the county, such as Gilroy, San Martin, parts of Morgan Hill, those are the communities that are really lacking access to broadband or really limited to the type of that they have. And also I want to emphasize the east side of San Jose. San Jose is my hometown where I was born and raised, and we really want to make sure that those communities also have as much access to middle mile broadband as possible so that the last mile can reach these communities as well. Please make sure to not forget our South County and East Side San Jose. Don't let the fact that we're in Silicon Valley mask away our broadband needs. And just thank you so much for all that you do, and I'll see you at the next month's meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pacheco.
Sean, I just see it's Takeda. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. I'm not seeing the full name.
Aloha, I'm Sean Taketa McLaughlin. I'm
Thank
at
you.
Access Humboldt in Eureka, California. And we mostly our roots are in media access and helping communities inform themselves and have a voice. And so we enter into the whole broadband discussion really thinking about the end user and what is the result of having networks that work and serve their purpose. And I think this is a really important time, if you can, to take a pause and try to look at the context of the work here, because it is historic what's happening. the public investment in public networks is an incredible shift from utility regulated, privately held, rate of return / profit seeking utility communications that we currently have sort of devolved into. So I just want to really congratulate you all for the focus on equity and digital equity and maintaining that frame as you work forward. And I think in terms of designing for equity, it would be very helpful to think about the end users. Like what did we do wrong in our media landscape that gave parts of our community so much less of a voice in media? And how can we avoid doing that as we deploy and build broadband networks? The FCC had a localism task force maybe about over a decade ago, but they looked at some of these core issues. What's the ecosystem of people having a voice and being informed? And for us, this leads us to argue in favor of really important aspects of network capacity, like symmetry, giving as much power to the voice as to the listen. We're not just consumers, we're also producers of content. And also openness, the notion of a filtered internet or monetized access to networks can really skew content. Things like zero rating. Anyway, I'm getting too subtle here, but you understand what I'm talking about. If you're talking about building a whole new network infrastructure that's going to be a layer that will connect people across the state of California. So the last quick point I want to make is privacy protection, consumer privacy. The surveillance economy is a pernicious layer of the commercial network offerings. And this is a huge opportunity for public investment to address that at a structural level. So thank you for indulging a minute or two of comment, and much appreciate the various processes here and at the PUC. Aloha.
Thank you, Mr. McLaughlin. Jill?
Shayna?
I'm Shayna England. I'm here on behalf of the California Community Foundation, and I want to echo my equity colleagues' gratitude for the focus and thank you for your work in this space. And coming from the California Community Foundation, our service area is Los Angeles County. And from that perspective, want to ensure that we're not missing a focus on the vast swaths of underserved in urban counties. So of course, the rural challenge is significant and real, as is the urban challenge, and they're very different in nature, as you all know, but the existing maps and data sets and some of the ways that the conversations are going, that we see a real risk of overlooking that really significant and very large in terms of size population. In LA County, we have 2 million people who do not have broadband subscriptions at home. And most of them say that's because it's not affordable for them or because the service is not reliable. So just want to ensure that we're not losing the voice of urban communities and the many people who live in them in the state as we think about this equity question. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn.
Mason Carroll?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi. Hey, my name is Mason Carroll. I'm lead engineer with Monkey Brains. We're a local internet service provider in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I just wanted to speak in support of middle mile fiber in not only in rural areas, but also in urban areas. Many urban areas are served by 1 or 2 internet service providers, and we are frequently approached by cities who want to do various projects, from serving low-income residents to schools and hospitals. And without middle mile fiber, it's basically impossible to bring different internet service options to those communities. You have to deal with the incumbents no matter what your project is. And so I just want to speak out in support of middle mile fiber. It's really going to put the state and individual cities in the driver's seat in deciding which areas that they want to serve within their cities, not just serving the most revenue dense areas of their downtown, but also serve their lower income areas and suburbs of their communities. And So the middle mile fiber is extremely important to put the cities and the state into the driver's seat. So we're in support of that. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Carroll.
Ernesto Falcon.
Hello, everyone. I'm Ernesto Falcone with the Electronic Frontier Foundation. Just a couple of thoughts, and this conversation's been fantastic. Just the clearly the middle mile is dependent on the last mile, and I think there is, given how new the law is, there's a real large gap between the opportunity created with this law and its ability to meet the demand, and the potential players that can deploy those last mile options. And I think that's understandable. We're empowering a huge number of people who normally did not do the broadband access work with tools to do it themselves and really solve low-income access in a difficult to serve challenge. And I think some of these communities with the ability to solve their own problems just aren't fully aware yet. And so I think there has to be a thought of how does the state advertise its middle mile effort to invoke interest and to kind of create that that understanding of like there's a means of working together with the state to solve this problem, particularly since you have grants in the loan loss reserve program and the technical support authority now at the state to really be a collaborator. And so I just want to highlight those. The combination of those things I think are not well known out there from people who I think would be really good at being those last mile connectors to the state's middle mile. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Falcon. All right. Joe, are there any other folks waiting?
Not that I see. Another call out to the people who are on the phone, if anyone would like to publicly comment.
All right. I think I'm hearing none, and also was looking for the chat activity that is now open, and looks like most of the information we're able to provide or responded to by staff. If there's no further public comment, I'm going to go ahead and close that period and come back to the advisory committee. Let me just give another opportunity here. Okay, no further hands raised. All right, we're going to go ahead and close the public comment. Thank you so much for those of you that took the time and share your thoughts with the advisory committee. Really appreciate your participation and engagement in this effort. Now that the public comment is closed, coming back to the advisory committee, just do a final round of any closing comments or thoughts before we wrap up the meeting today. Also seeing none, we're definitely wrapping up ahead of the time, so that's good. And once again, this meeting does go on for every month around this date. All the dates are already been preset. It's published on the website, and the website link is on the chat as well. For committee members, if there are any agenda item, please do let staff know. We're trying to go ahead and incorporate those at the best time possible. And then the material that is being shared today, the presentation deck that you saw earlier, will be made available through the website as well. So without any further comments or input from the committee member, I move to go ahead and adjourn this meeting. Thank you, everyone, and see you next month.
Thank you.